everyone, hope you're all doing really well, and this is my spoiler-free review for Dead Djinn in Cairo. So this is a short review for a short story, it won't take too long, but yeah, this is a short story that is a prequel to a story called The Master of Djinn by the same author, obviously because it's a prequel. And I believe there are 3 short stories in total. You follow agent Fatma al-Sha'arabi, and she is a sort of, not police detective, but almost like a similar thing, but in the specific sort of division devoted to magical happenstances and whatnot. And you follow her as she investigates the murder of a djinn, who are supposed to be immortal, so obviously this has got a bit more sort of mystery to it than any normal murder investigation. We follow her over the course of one night, since this is a short story, the timeline has been condensed. She follows the line of inquiry to try and discover who the murderer is and sort of uncovers a slightly larger plot than she anticipated. I loved this story so much. I just listened to the audiobook, I signed up for a free trial of Scribd, whatever the platform is called, and yeah, so it was just one of the ones that I could listen to, and it was one that I sort of had on my radar for a while, so when I was sort of looking through all their different books to try and listen to, I found A Dead Djinn in Cairo and I thought I'll give it a try. It's a very short story, it was only about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and yeah, it was just a really, really great story. Fatma is such a great protagonist. She's clever and defiant and takes no shit from all the men around her who don't believe that she's, you know, there's several, the sort of gender imbalance in this world is still quite sort of, you know, women are sort of just being allowed into work and stuff, or at least, you know, women in sort of positions like Fatma's are still uncommon, so she kind of had to deal with all the prejudice and stuff that come with that. But she just takes no shit from anybody, and she's just honestly fantastic. I loved all her interactions with other people. And the small bits of her backstory that you get along the way, such as her dad and her upbringing, as well as the story of the way she dresses how she does, you know, she's just such a rich, interesting character, and for such a short story you get such a good sense of who she is and, you know, just what her deal is and stuff. The setting in this is awesome. It's like steampunk Cairo kind of vibes. Well, it's the steampunk genre but in Cairo. I know traditionally steampunk is usually kind of set in a kind of Victorian London setting. I thought it was really interesting of the author to take that whole concept and move it to Cairo. I'm in such a steampunk mood recently, so I've been really, really enjoying it, and just as it happens, you know, this one turned out to be a steampunk book as well, so really enjoyed that. I found all the world building to be really intriguing, like, you know, the backstory of magic. Magic has only really been around for about 40-50 years. I thought that was a really interesting concept, but like, seeing how things have adapted and changed in that time, and the different types of magical creatures that you get, such as djinn or angels or ghouls and stuff, like, you know, there's lots of different magic around, and it's quite interesting to see how this society has adapted so quickly to such a huge change. As well as just the mysteries surrounding the man who kind of kickstarted the change. I won't tell you too much about that, but you know, that was just a really interesting thing to introduce in this book, and I have a feeling that information is going to be important later.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
The concept of angels here as well was a really interesting idea. Like, we don't get too much into them, but like, you know, as I said, it's a short story, we get introductions to a lot of stuff in this world, and I really want to see more of them because they are really fascinating. And as well as the religions that are sort of mentioned briefly, you know, you have the angels believing that they have come from like God, and people also believing that they are angels from an almost, I believe they're a sort of like Christian type of faith. But then you also have, you know, just lots of other different religions that were kind of mentioned, but then one that's kind of explored, because you do meet some characters to do with this, are ones that kind of almost follow the ancient Egyptian religion, almost in sort of like underground cult type ideas, following different ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses and stuff. You know, it was really interesting to see the author take such a old, dead religion that a lot of people sort of, you know, and sort of explore the attitudes of the sort of people in the world towards that, and then how some people, with the new revelation about djinn and angels and stuff in the last 50 years, how it's kick-started almost this cult-like, you know, behaviour towards all these old gods now in the modern era. I just loved all these different ideas. They all came together really well to create this incredibly rich and vibrant and layered world that I just cannot wait to read more about. They also did a really great job of establishing Fatma and her place in the world. As I said, you know, she's just a really great protagonist. I absolutely love her. And you know, you definitely feel like she's existed before the story. You know, sometimes you come into a story and, you know, it's almost like you don't quite feel that the character exists out with the story, if you know what I mean. You know, sometimes, you know, authors don't perhaps do a very good job of establishing previous people or previous relationships that the main characters have had, but Fatima definitely feels like she's existed on her own for a long time before the story even starts. You know, there's references to people she knows or cases she's worked, or, you know, you just feel like she's just, you know, she's just a really well-rounded character, and I love her to bits. I found the pacing of this to be almost perfect. Like I said, it takes place over the course of one night, and I think for a short story that was a really, really good thing for the author to do, to condense down the timeline and only focus on a certain amount of time. And I really loved how that then allowed everything to be paced. You know, it's Fatima following this murder investigation over the course of one night. You know, everything kind of feels very well paced as she goes from one clue to the other sort of thing. And it doesn't feel drawn out either. But it does, I think, suffer from it being a bit too short, because, as I said, you know, she kind of uncovers a larger plan at work, and the finale feels almost too big for the size of story that we have. It definitely felt like, you know, it was really, really well paced with these new characters, new concepts all introduced and developed and discussed really well. The action scenes were well paced and well written. But then all of a sudden, you know, you've been following all these clues, and then the sort of last sort of final pieces are almost pointed out in an expositional conversation. Did feel a bit like an info dump. And then Fatima works out the last piece. I got it seconds before she did. And then all of a sudden it's rush, finale, and it's over. Like, it was just so well paced up until you find out exactly what's happening, and then, yeah, it's just, like, done. And, as I said, it's such a huge, like, thing that's going on, like, really huge stakes and stuff, and I think it just almost felt like that just wasn't built up to enough because of the size of story that we have. But at the same time, I'm not begrudging it. It was still a really interesting short story, and, you know, it doesn't let it down in any way. It just kind of, it just sort of feels like, you know, the pacing kind of goes like that all of a sudden. The villain had really interesting motivations as well. I won't say too much about them, but I thought they were a really interesting character, and I really liked how you find out why they were doing what they were doing. I just thought it was really interesting logic. Up to a point. Yeah, one of the most interesting villains I read for a while. I read the audiobook, and I have to say I loved the narrator. I found her very easy to listen to. I loved the way she did the voices for all the characters. Like, you know, she doesn't change it too much, but you can, you know, there was one scene where there was 4 different women talking, and I always knew who was speaking before the part of the story, like, you know, Fatima said or Siti said. You know, I always knew who was speaking before we got told who was speaking. I thought that I did a really, really good job. Even when it was like, you know, sometimes it's easy to tell, obviously, because, you know, the women's voices will be pitched a bit higher, the men's voices will be pitched a bit lower. As I said, this was a scene with 4 separate women, and she changed the accents and the voices and just the way they talk enough that I knew exactly who was talking at all times. So a really fantastic narrator. I did find the writing to be a bit, not description heavy, but the way the description was woven into the action sometimes felt a bit, I don't know, naive? You can say painting's naive. Can you say writing's naive? Somebody tell me, does naive work in a writing context, or is that just an art thing? So, like, you know, it was all like, you know, she smoothed back the strands of her long brown hair and turned to the small moustached detective standing behind her, taking in the sweeping carpets and rooms that she was standing in before turning her attention to the small ticking clock in her hand. You know, example sentence that is not a real quote from the book, that's just like me vaguely remembering like some of the stuff. Like, you know, it was all very, you know, we're going to add the description into the action stuff, and that did kind of bother me a little bit, but as I got used to it, it was alright, and it kind of wears off as the story goes on. I think once the author almost found their rhythm as to when to use that sort of description and when to just sort of be like, this is what the person looked like, this is what we're looking at, sort of thing. So yeah, it was alright, but just to begin with I was just like, I'm not sure if I'm feeling this writing. I really want to read these other short stories before moving on to Dead Djinn and Cairo. I think they're a really good setup, I think, to the stuff that happens in the first book. Not that I've read Master of Djinn, but I read the synopsis, and I think it would be beneficial to read these short stories before reading it, and yeah, just to sort of get an idea of the world building and stuff, but then before then jumping into the full novel. And yeah, as I said, I just really, really loved this book. It was such a good fun story. World building is just so cool. I love the setting. I'm in love with Fatma, like, she's definitely my new sort of book crush, I think. Absolutely love her and the way she interacts with everybody and everything that kind of goes on there, and just her whole deal. I just love her. It was just a really well-paced short story. You know, I really loved the condensed time setting. I thought that was really fun, because when I started listening to it, I was just like, is this all going to happen over the course of one night because this is your short story? And then it did, and I was like, great, love that. I love when TV shows or books and stuff like have things set in like one place or in very short amounts of time. I think that's really fun to see happen. Like, you know, for example, Doctor Who Midnight is set all in one condensed setting, and that leads to some really interesting stuff. Same with Class, they had an episode that was set in one room. Doctor Who again did a real-time episode once. It wasn't very good, but it was a really interesting concept where the entire episode lasted 42 minutes or something, and everything happened in real time in that episode. Shit episode, but good concept. I love when things do stuff like that, and this is like the first time I kind of really come across a book that's done something like that, which I thought was really interesting, and I kind of want to see if I can find more of things that, like, you know, stories that take place in really confined spaces or confined time periods. So yeah, I am so excited to read the rest of these short stories and then get into Master of Djinn. I would highly recommend this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I knocked the 1 star off for the writing and also for, as I said, the pacing. The finale felt a little bit too big for the size of story. But all in all, fantastic story. Cannot recommend it enough. Read it. Have you read A Dead Djinn in Cairo? Please let me know what you think down in the comments below. Have you read A Master of Djinn? You know, how's that book looking? Do you think, have you read the books? Have you read the short stories before you read the book, or have you read the book and are now considering reading the short stories? Definitely let me know what you've done down below in the comments. If you've watched this video, you clearly enjoyed yourself, so leave a like on this video. As I said, comment and feel free to subscribe. I post once or twice during the week at the moment. I'm about to go back to university, and you know, my sports club that I'm involved with as well as university are quite intense, so I'm hoping I will still be able to post twice a week, but that might go down to once a week. But as I said, just watch this space and we'll see what happens there. I will update you as to whether or not that will be happening. But thanks so much for watching. I will see you next time.